Carry on. Have a good session.
Okay. Excellent. So, welcome to the second session on secure multiparty computation. We have 6 talks, 6 presentations. And the first one is on the efficient Byzantine agreement and multiparty computation with a synchronous fallback by Giovanni De Ligius, Martin Hirt, and Chenda Yuzang. And Giovanni will give the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here presenting this work I carried out jointly with Chenda and Martin and ETH. And as was said, I'm going to be talking about round-efficient Byzantine agreement and multi-party computation protocols with asynchronous fallback. So maybe I'll save the usual introduction about what MPC and Byzantine agreement protocols are, and I'll talk a bit more in general about the fact that when one is designing distributed protocols in general, then one needs to make assumptions about the network infrastructure that is available to the parties communicating. And typically, 2 main models in the literature about this are the synchronous model of communication and the asynchronous model. And these models are very different in nature. In the synchronous model, we assume that parties have access to synchronized clocks, and protocols typically proceed in rounds, and we assume an upper bound delay on the delivery time of messages between parties, while in the asynchronous model, both of these assumptions are dropped, and we allow the adversary to schedule the delivery of messages arbitrarily. So unsurprisingly, what can be achieved in these 2 models is quite different, and typically for distributed protocols, for example, BA and MPC in synchronous models, one can achieve security up to n-halves corruptions, roughly speaking, while in the asynchronous model, secure protocols can only be achieved typically up to n-third corruptions. And so this kind of creates a problem when deploying protocols in kind of, let's say, real-life networks, which have the property of usually being pretty fast, but can occasionally maybe experience delays or bottlenecks that cause some messages to be delayed for longer than expected. Then one needs to decide whether to use protocols that are designed in the synchronous model, thus risking very bad security failures when even just one message is delayed for longer than expected, or whether to deploy protocols that are asynchronous in nature and not take advantage of the fact that, usually you can assume upper bound on the delay of messages. So it's not surprising that people have tried to kind of come up with protocols that exploit best of both worlds, meaning that we are looking for protocols that are secure both when the network is synchronous and when the network is asynchronous, maybe up to some different threshold of corruptions. And in particular, 2 works in 2019 published at TCC by Bloom, Katz, and Loss, and one published in 2020 at Crypto by Bloom, Yuzang, and Loss. They showed feasibility results in this sense for both Byzantine agreement and multi-party computation, where they showed that you can actually achieve protocols that are secure when run both over synchronous and asynchronous networks. Yeah, thank you. And exactly under some optimal trade-offs on these threshold of corruptions, that is the corruptions when the network is asynchronous, plus 2 times the corruptions when the network is synchronous, must be smaller than that. And this is probably optimal in this setting. And there have been many follow-ups to this work, protocols exploring protocols that are secure in synchronous networks and achieve responsiveness and stuff like this. But we mostly follow up on these 2 works. And our focus in our work is improving the round complexity of this protocol. So quickly, I made this chart pointing out that there is quite a difference between the protocol presented in these papers and state-of-the-art purely synchronous protocols when it comes to round complexity. For example, BA protocols that come in 2 flavors when talking about constant round protocols that are purely synchronous typically require a constant number of rounds. And MPC protocols have a number of rounds which doesn't depend on the depth of the circuit to evaluate. So we're trying to fill the gap here, and this is going to be our contribution. And our positive results in this sense are a Byzantine agreement protocol that is achieves the same optimal trade-offs as the protocols presented before, but is also round efficient in the sense that it matches the round complexity of the most efficient known at the time purely synchronous protocols when the network is synchronous. And for multi-party computation, we provided an MPC protocol whose number of all-to-all broadcast rounds only is constant in the depth of the circuit to evaluate, and it's not linear in the depth of the circuit to evaluate. So to quickly wrap this up, I would just like to give an idea of how one of these constructions looks on a high level. So the idea to achieve BA, which is secure both in synchronous and asynchronous networks due to Bloom-Katzen laws, is to compile two different protocols, a synchronous one and an asynchronous one in succession. And let's say roughly the security of the construction when the network is synchronous falls mostly on the synchronous protocol, and the security of the construction when the network is asynchronous falls mostly on the asynchronous protocols. And since our focus is round efficiency, and we observed that the asynchronous protocols they employ in this setting were already round efficient when the network is synchronous, our focus is improving the round efficiency of the synchronous component of this compiler, which also requires some extra property when the network is asynchronous. And so the way we do this is exploiting a known construction of Feldman and Micali, which runs iterations of a weaker consensus protocol known as weak consensus, or Crusaders agreement in some other work, followed by common coin toss functionality. And by iterating this protocol many times, one can kind of reach security up to a negligible probability. And one of our contributions is providing constructions of this synchronous weak consensus protocol with these extra properties that I mentioned here. And so the main challenge in this setting is that when a party doesn't receive a message from some other party, one cannot know if this message was dropped by the adversary because the network is asynchronous, or if this message was simply not delivered because it wasn't sent in the first place, because the network maybe is synchronous, but the guy sending the message is corrupted. So yeah, this is one high-level overview of one technical contribution. We have many other impossibility results and also the results for MPC, as I stated, but there's no time to talk about anything. So this is it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any.
So let's thank Giovanni again.
Thank you.
Next presentation. And remember to write the question. Here. That's better. Okay, so our next presentation is two-round maliciously secure computation with super polynomial simulation by Amit Agrawal, James Bartusek, Vipul Goyal, Dakshita Khuana, Giulio Malavolta, and Amit will give the
Hello everyone. Today I'd like to present my work on two-round maliciously secure MPC with super polynomial simulation. And this is joint work with James Bartusek, Vipul Goyal, Dakshita Khuana, and Giulio. So let me start by describing the setting of MPC. So here we have a set of parties, each with their private inputs, and their goal is to compute some function C on their inputs by interacting with each other. The adversary might corrupt some subset of these parties, and we want the security that adversary shouldn't learn anything about honest party's input apart from what it can learn from the output of the function. And the adversary that we are considering is polynomial time adversaries with arbitrary static corruptions, malicious behavior, and dishonest multiparty. So in this work, our focus was on round complexity of MPC. And so let me start by describing the progress that has been made in this direction. So from 80s, we know a polynomial round MPC protocol by GMW. And there have been possibility results about 2-round and 3-round MPC protocols. On the positive side, we know of constant round and even 4-round MPC protocols assuming OT. Given these results, it's natural to ask, can we go below 4 rounds by relaxing some of the parameters? Indeed, in 2018, these works by Kirk and Srinivasan and Benamud and Lin showed how to do 2-round MPC, assuming OT, but the security was only against semi-malicious adversaries. In 2017, these works showed that we can do 2-round maliciously secure MPC using super polynomial simulation, but the restriction was that only one of the parties can receive the output. In our work, we show how to do 2-round maliciously secure MPC using super polynomial simulation, where all parties can receive the output at the end of round. With that, let me just give a brief description of what super polynomial simulation is. So here we describe security in the usual real ideal paradigm, saying that the real world protocol is secure if there is an ideal world simulator which can produce a computation indistinguishable transcript. But the relaxation here is that we allow the simulator to run in super polynomial time. And this makes sense in scenarios because in most cases, the ideal functionality itself is secure in super polynomial addresses. So with that, let me describe in any 2-round MPC protocols, parties exchange their first round message and then their round 2 message, and at the end retrieve the output of the function on the private inputs. But if Bob is malicious, he can send a malformed round 1 message. And if Alice continues the protocol, Bob can not just learn the output of the function, but also clean some information about private input of Alice. So what we need here is that Alice should do some form of validation before sending her own round 2 message. One straightforward solution is to attach zero-knowledge proofs attesting the validity of round 1 message and have the parties check each other proofs before sending their round 2 message. This ensures that the parties only receive the output of the function and nothing else, but these form of non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs require a CRS, which is a trusted setup assumption. And in this work, we were trying to construct 2-round MPC protocol in the plain model, which is maliciously secure. So with that, we asked whether there are alternatives to zero-knowledge proofs which wouldn't require setup. For example, intuitively, can we have it so that Alice can lock her second round message in a box and send it over so that the box is decryptable by Bob only if Bob sent a valid round 1 message. And if not, the box wouldn't be open and Bob wouldn't be able to retrieve Alice's second round message. Indeed, there is a known primitive in the literature called conditional disclosure of secret, which is a 2-party protocol between a sender and receiver, sender having a secret message M and receiver having a secret witness W. And it allows the sender to transmit M conditionally to the receiver if the instance witness pair is valid. And it also hides the witness from the sender's view. But this form of 2-party CTS doesn't directly work in the MPC setting because an adversary which is corrupting 2 possible receivers, sending valid message on behalf of one receiver and invalid message on behalf of other receiver can still retrieve Alice's second round message. And we do not want this in a dishonest majority setting. What we want is that the second round message of Alice should be delivered only if all round 1 messages from all other parties were valid. So with that, we formalize the notion of multi-party version of CDS, where we have a sender and multiple possible receivers, each with their instance with this pairs. And we want to achieve the functionality that the sender secret message should be transferred to all receivers if all instance witness pairs were valid. So our approach for constructing this multi-party CTS is the following. So we start with this primitive called witness encryption for NISC of commitments in the CRS model given in this paper by Benamud and Lin. This is based on SXT's assumption on bilinear groups. We remove the CRS in the protocol using Nevis, and what we get in the end is 2-party CTS with a special property called public reconstruction in the plain model. And this public reconstruction allows the ciphertext of witness encrypted plain text to be decryptable using public proofs. And by relying on this public reconstruction property, we extended to multi-party CDS in the plain model by just secret sharing the sender's message across multiple 2-party CDS sessions. So finally, we get a multi-party CDS protocol, which has the following interaction pattern. In round 1, receivers send some encodings of the input to the senders. And in round 2, senders send ciphertext to the receivers, and receivers at the same time can exchange proofs with each other. And what happens at the end of round 2 is all receivers can is the correctness property. So if all instance witness pairs were valid, then all receivers can retrieve the sender's message at the end of round 2. Sender security says that if any of the instances were invalid, then the sender's message M is hidden from all the receivers. And receiver security says that sender's view is computationally indistinguishable between 2 possible choices of witness used by the receiver. Sender security should hold even if some subset of receivers are colluding, and receiver security should hold even if sender and some subset of receivers are colluding. So with that, we use this MCTS primitive to compile any generic 2-round semi-maliciously secure MPC protocol into a 2-round fully maliciously secure MPC protocol in the following way. So note that in any 2-round semi-malicious MPC protocol, parties exchange the round 1 message and round 2 messages. Now, what we do as a first step is just condition the transfer of second round MPC message on an NP statement, which captures the validity of round 1 MPC messages of other parties. This is not sufficient because the MCTS that we construct only provides a WI style kind of hiding. So what we do is we append the round 1 message to include commitments to some trapdoor values and commitments to potential guess to those trapdoor values. And this is reminiscent of the 5HME trapdoor paradigm. So, and we then modify the MCTS NP statement to have the following conditions. So the round 2 MPC message will be transferred if the round 1 MPC message of all other parties were valid, or the other parties successfully guessed the trapdoor values. And we require some form of special non-malleability property to hold between these blue and yellow commitments, for which I'll refer you to the paper. So our final result is the following. There exists a 2-round maliciously secure MPC protocol in the plane model with super polynomial simulation, assuming a bilinear group in which Gaussian and SXTX is sub-exponentially hard. And we use this to instantiate sub-exponential secure versions of GOS naming and Mahmoud Alin with its encryption scheme. We also require 2-round sub-exponentially secure MPC against semi-malicious adversaries. And this follows by instantiating known works with sub-exponential secure 2-round OT. For the special non-interactive, non-malleable commitments, we have 2 possible instantiations. For constant number of parties, this follows from sub-exponentially secure time-lock puzzles and sub-exponential quantum hardness of LWE. For bounded polynomial number of parties, we require sub-exponential quantum hardness amplifiability of LWE, sub-exponential hardness amplifiability of TTH, and sub-exponentially secure 1 message peak secure. Thanks.
Thank you, Amit. We have time for questions. I have a question, like, did you look for other places for this idea of replacing the general knowledge group with the SDS to help, cap the number of...
I think in two-party, so the question was whether this idea of replacing zero knowledge groups with CDS has been used in other places. And I think I've seen this in two-party settings being used, but in the multi-party setting, it becomes more tricky because of the challenge that I mentioned. That you have to send the sender's message if all the instance witness fails to valid. So it's unclear. And also we have to remain in the 2-round setting where at the end of 2 rounds, all receivers should be able to decrypt the message if all the receivers were sending the valid message. So this kind of guarantee is not what I've seen in previous years.
Other questions? Maybe you can come to the marks.
So whenever you have like some less than threshold number of corruptions, you have kind of guaranteed output delivery?
No, we don't focus on guaranteed output delivery. So just in the dishonest.
So even if you have like 1 corruption.
Yeah, even if there's 1 corruption, the party can send invalid message and abort the protocol. Yeah. So
Right. So let's thank Amit again. Chain done. This is our next. Should remember to take this off when I speak. This is our next presentation: adaptive security of multi-party protocols revisited by Martin Herd, Chenda Liu Zhang, and Yuli Maurer. And Chenda will give the presentation. We already heard in this session about another work of yours.
So thanks for the introduction. So this paper is on security definitions for MPC protocols. Well, we already know what MPC is about, right? Parties have the computing devices, some can be hacked and so on. And the goal is to construct an ideal secure distributed system, even when some of the devices can be hacked, right? And in this work, we consider the setting of adaptive corruption, where the corruption choice can be made during the protocol execution and based on any information that has been gathered so far. So the standard adaptive security definition kind of says that we obtain an ideal system that consists of this MPC system. This is kind of the trusted party. And we also have a simulator that is supposed to simulate anything that is leaked to the adversary in the real world. The simulator has to come up with this using only the data of the corrupted parties at any point in time. So for example, if parties 3 and 4 are corrupted, you have to generate this view based on the inputs and outputs of parties 3 and 4. While this definition is very intuitive, right? Like anything that happens in the real world, I can reproduce in the ideal world. It seems to be apparently technically too strong. And one of the main challenges is the so-called commitment problem. So let me try to explain it with a very simple example. So imagine that there are 2 parties, P1, P2. Party 1 gives an input and commits to its input using some perfectly hiding commitment scheme, let's say. Because the channel is authenticated, the adversary sees this block, P, and therefore the simulator has to come up with a fake block P prime without knowing what the input is, because party 1 is honest, right? The problem now is that if the adversary adaptively corrupts party P1, it learns its internal state, and therefore the simulator cannot explain the internal state. It cannot open the fake commitment B prime with respect to the input X1. And what does this mean, right? The first thing we can ask is whether this is like a real problem or not. Maybe yes, maybe not. So imagine that we are given this super secure protocol. Someone very smart gave us this protocol. And he promises us that this is super secure, right? But we just do some random stuff in the beginning. We get an input, we commit to it. And the overall protocol is, at least we cannot prove that the overall protocol is secure under the current adaptive notion, which means that the fact that we publish this commitment scheme makes the overall protocol insecure, or at least we don't know how to prove it secure, even when the commitment is, or even when the block is perfectly hiding, right? Even when the string B is statistically independent of the input X1, and no matter how secure the following protocol is. And as a result, typically we use things like secure erasures, inferring an additional assumption, or we make use of other primitives like non-committing encryption, which incur an important efficiency loss. So in this paper, we basically ask, is there a natural definition for adaptive security that is not subject to this commitment problem? The answer is yes. And the idea is basically, our solution is basically, we make a security statement for each possible set of parties. And the statement holds as long as the set of parties is honest. So for example, in the case where we have these 3 parties, P1 up to P3, in the beginning, we make all this number of statements. As soon as P1 is corrupted, some of the statements do not need to hold anymore, but all those statements that correspond to sets of so far honest parties still hold, and so on and so forth. And we will give an instantiation where the guarantee will ensure the following somehow. Like intuitively, what we are saying is that any information that is leaked up to time t, I can explain with the data of corrupted parties at that specific point in time, and this holds for any point in time. And technically, the guarantee for a set X says the data that has been leaked to the adversary so far depends only on the data of parties that are not in X, irrespective of whether they are corrupted or not. So technically, we're saying the simulator can read the inputs of any party that is not in X. And this guarantee has to hold for any set X as long as the set X is honest. And here are some lemmas about our proposed definition. So our definition is kind of strictly in the middle of the current adaptive, standard adaptive definition that exists, and static. It overcomes the type of commitment problem that I told you before. And as a result, many of these protocols that are believed to be secure in practice, like CDN based on threshold homomorphic encryption, and also the closed protocol, the one that doesn't use non-committing encryption. These two protocols can be proven secure under the new notion. And also, on the other hand, we also believe that this security definition gives strong adaptive security guarantees, in the sense that many of the examples that separate static from standard adaptive actually also separate static from our new notion. Yeah, so for more details, I can refer you to the ePrint version of the paper.
Thank you. Okay, so let's thank Chinda again. Okay, so in the next presentation, we'll hear about Dory, efficient, transparent arguments for generalized inner products and polynomial commitments. And Jonathan Lee will give the talk.
Well, thank you for the introduction. If this works. There we go. So what's an efficient, transparent argument? We've seen enough argument protocols in the last couple of days. So we have a prover, verifier, some empty language L. And basically the prover has to try to demonstrate to the verifier that they know some witness for X being an L. Now in this talk, we're going to be thinking about some sort of computational soundness. So P is going to accept if and only if the prover does know some witness, modulo, as I say, some computational assumptions. Now the two interesting things we're going to require is, one, we want these things to be efficient. So what that's going to mean in this context is that the setup stage, if there is one, and proving are going to be on the order of the witness size, and verification and proof size are going to be order log the witness size. Throughout, there's going to be some sort of dependence on what the concrete security level is. I'm going to suppress that. And the other statement is that we need these systems to be transparent. That means that the setup can't have secrets. So, for example, you can't use Kate-style commitments where there's some KOE and some secret exponent. So, what's the setting? Field scalars, we're going to have some curve. We're going to need a parent. And the two kinds of arguments we're going to be interested in are generalized inner product arguments. So here, I've written this in a slightly abstract form, but we've got some vector spaces, we've got some pairing, sorry, some inner product. And the notion is that if you commit to these inputs into the output, then you can make some argument that you know openings consistent with the inner product. And then this very naturally gives you a polynomial commitment. So in this context, you fix some degree sequences. And now, much as before, you would commit to a polynomial, you commit to an evaluation of that polynomial, and there's some argument that allows you to prove that you can open that commitment to a polynomial to something that is consistent with evaluation at some public point. I should note that polynomial commitments are obviously a specialization of inner product arguments, because you can just take X, multiply it out, and then look at monomials one by one. So why would you care about this thing, other than it maybe being intrinsically interesting? Mostly there are some nice ways of building ZK snarks for NP-complete languages out of polynomial commitments. So there's many prior works that show you how to do some purely information theoretic reduction with log size proofs and log size verifiers. But you then need to be able to do these polynomial commitment evaluations. And many prior works have sort of bundled particular ways of doing that reduction with particular ways of doing the polynomial commitment to give you a sort of overall protocol. And it's pretty natural to study the reduction and the polynomial commitment separately. It gives you better modularity. Though that will have some irritating technical implications for the security definitions, for which I will refer you to the paper. So again, given that we care about applications, every once in a while, we would like to have concretely small constants. And also in practice, you will find that many of these applications will produce several polynomials and maybe evaluate them at a few places. So it would be quite nice if you could evaluate a batch of polynomials at some batch of places and do that more efficiently than doing them one at a time. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of all prior work, but there are here 3 examples of, I will say, like best in class ways of doing this. So you have things like hierarchs, which are based on D-log, no pairings. You have things like fractal, which are based on typically interactive proximity proof through root element codes, and so ultimately on hashing. And you have some new and, as best I understand, not yet concretely implemented schemes like supersonic, which are based on groups of unknown order and have some really interesting things. So, at a fixed security level, just concretely 128 bits, what does this sort of look like practically? Like, what are the sort of hidden constants you might see in these kinds of schemes? Well, so, we have some concrete sizes, between, depending on scheme, you might lose maybe an order of magnitude there. And similarly, when you look at the actual time it takes to do these things, you can lose anything between 3 and 6 orders of magnitude. So like these are, in some sense, just constants, but they are important constants. And, like, given that you might have to transmit a commitment and then open it, there are some things which get a little troubling here. So hierarchs has quite large commitments. That's pretty unavoidable. Things like fractal have got an extra stray log factor that we don't really like. And things like supersonic, again, log factors, and also concretely very slow. So, as is traditional, I have a table that looks like this, and, I'm going to have to tell you what this work does. So the main difference is we're going to require a pairing. But once you give me that pairing, everything else cleans up. So we have logarithmic time to evaluate, logarithmic space, setup and evaluation on the prover side are running in square root, which is quite nice. And the concrete constants are a little worse than they would be in something like hierarchs, basically because we've moved from just a curve with no pairing, like curve 25519, up to a curve with a pairing, concretely the LS12 for 81. But, we'll see what this is practically useful later. So what is actually going on here? So it's a new generalized inner product argument, and so we get a polynomial commitment scheme. It's morally very similar to bulletproofs or the more recent generalized inner product arguments. And like the easiest way to think about this is multilinear polynomials, but the paper has details on how to do everything. So what do we need? We need SXDH, so nothing too unusual. And like the basic point here is that we're going to, in the setup stage, we sample some large number of elements, and then we compute a very small number of structured commitments to those elements. And the verifier, in a slightly clever way, is going to use those commitments to be able to offload a bunch of its computation. So whereas in something like bulletproofs, you end up with some linear computation on the verifier, here we're going to get the prover to do a bunch of that for us. And then we have to do some extra tricks to get that down to log n. By default, you get log squared. So just unpacking that a little, why could this happen at all? So we're really going to be working with Peterson's style, or the generalization AFGHO commitments. So here, groups are going to be written additively. If you want to commit some vector v with some blind r, you have some generators gamma, and you take some sort of inner product here, which could just be scalars multiplied by group elements, or this could be some vector of elements in G1, and the generator of being G2, or vice versa. This is not quite the AFGH definition, but it's close enough that it doesn't matter. And the key thing about these is they're structure preserving. So you can do F linear operations. And one particularly nice thing for AFGHO in particular is there's a symmetry between the messages that you're committing, like these vectors in G1, and the generators, right, which are another vector in G2. So you can swap those over. And what that basically means is that we're going to be able to recurse. So just sketching what goes on in bulletproofs. The key point is you've got some inner product, and you can break an inner product between two large vectors into a bunch of smaller inner products and combine them as verifier challenges. And if you actually go and look at the arguments, what you'll end up with is some sort of commitment to an inner product and two sort of commitments to individual vectors. You use this kind of folding recursively, and you end up with some very structured vector built up as a tensor product. And there's some eventual claim about some scalars, v1 prime, v2 prime, such as this is supposed to hold. Now, traditionally, the verifier then has to go and compute something like these x plus minus inner products with the gammas, and that's where the linear verifier comes from. So how might we try and offload that? So again, the key point is that these x vectors have tensor product structure. So if we split the generators into the left half and the right half, then you can actually just rewrite this thing as some shorter inner product. And this is what we're going to do in the setup stage, is the verifier is going to have pre-computed some commitments to those generators. So it knows what gamma 1L and gamma 1R are in some sort of abstract way under the commitment, and it can combine them. Now, this is a little tricky to do by default. You would expect that you still have like this x plus prime, which is still linearly long. So how do I get any saving? And it turns out that this is okay because essentially it's got a tensor product structure still. And at the end of the protocol, you're going to have to take some inner products with another vector with tensor product structure. That turns out to go nicely. And you can recurse because G1 and G2 swap over. You then have to do some irritating, boring details in order to actually make this work for a polynomial commitment, not just a bulletproof type argument. So we have to add some public scalars. And again, you could get a linear verifier time here, but we don't for polynomial commitments. And then, much as in prior works, we build a polynomial commitment for polynomials out of a two-tier commitment matrices. And we can batch all of our arguments, which is quite nice. So practically, what does this mean? Well, so here we're comparing with Spartan, which is a Hyrax-like polynomial commitment. And I mean, the key point here is you lose a small factor on the prover, but a small constant factor. But your commitment sizes are very small. Your evaluation again is worst by constant. But the evaluation of the proofs goes logarithmically rather than square root. So practically, this works quite well for polynomial degrees above like 2 to the 20, 2 to the 22. And in practice, you often see 2 to the 20, 2 to the 30 showing up here. So this actually matters. And also we batch nicely. So just to give a sort of sketch for this, if you were to go the whole hog and have hard to prove assumptions, you could do things like Roth, where proof verification is maybe sort of 1 millisecond. So in some sense, we're getting quite good once you can take the batches. And code will be hopefully out in a couple of weeks, and refer to the paper for details. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have time for a very short question. So I guess we'll move to the next presentation.
Access the wrong application.
So it turned out we have a question in the chat that we did not notice. We'll return to that at the end of the session. The next talk is about multiparty PSM revisited, improved communication and unbalanced communication by Leonard Asulin, Cameron Liu, and Leonard will give the talk. Could you find the presentation?
Can you confirm that you're seeing the right slide?
Yes, we are.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk about multiparty PSM revisited, improved communication, and balanced communication. This is joint work with Tianren and Liu. So in private simultaneous messages, we have parties. So I'm going to start by explaining in the two-party case where Alice and Bob each have inputs, and we have a referee, which is another party, and the referee wants to learn the function f of x1 and x2, and f is some public functionality. To do that, Alice and Bob are going to send messages non-interactively, so one round to the referee. And we have the correctness condition when the referee learns that function. And it is secure if the unbounded referee learns nothing else. So we're concerned about information theoretic security. And Alice and Bob are going to share some random bits that the referee does not have access to. The important measure here is the communication complexity. So that is how many bits Alice and Bob send. And we can generalize this setting to the multi-party case with key parties. So the relevant previous works for our paper are, so first, this concept was introduced by Fege, Kilian, and Naor, and they show a first non-trivial PSM. Then this result has been improved by Baimel, Kushilevich, and Nissim with the square root of the total input space size. And for small k, there has been some other results with nice complexities. In this work, we improve the complexity for infinitely many k of n to the power of k minus 1 over 2. We prove this for infinitely many k and all k less than 20. We also have new results on two-party PSM. The best known two-party PSM is from BIKK, where it's square root of n, the complexity. In FKN, they show the first trivial one, but also it's possible to have one party send n bits and another one send log n bits. And here we have what we call unbalanced PSM, where one party is going to send something of size eta and another one of size 1 minus eta. We prove this for many rational etas. So let's look at our technique now. We consider f to be its truth table, and the vectors are going to be represented by the index vectors. And we're interested in learning the inner product of the truth table of f and the tensoring of all of the inputs. So if f is represented as this matrix, we can represent the tensoring of two inputs as this matrix, and this gives the index of the correct output in the truth table of the function. With this representation, we can first show a naive two-party PSM. So Alice and Bob have their input x1 and x2 of n bits, and they are going to share some random values R1 and R2. They're going to mask their inputs with those random values and send them to the referee. The referee needs to learn f of x1 and x2. So with what the referee just got, this is the equation that is written here. And so the green values, Alice and Bob need to send them to. So since R1 and R2 are shared, Alice and Bob can actually just send those values, and we one-time pad them with some bit S that is also shared. This yields a communication complexity of big O of n. This is not the best possible, but it's a first introduction to PSM. Now, in our method, we have k parties, and instead of having each party send an input themselves, they're going to actually be, we are going to combine many subsets of parties. And so these subsets are going to act as big parties that are going to send some inputs, of course, without interacting with each other. But this is explained in further detail in the paper. And to learn the correct value, the referee will compute so f of all the messages. This is the target term, what we want the referee to learn. Then we have some easy terms. Those are referee computable. That is, we can have the parties send information for the referee to compute them. But then we have what we call hard terms. And this, it would require too high of a communication complexity. So the technique is to cancel those hard terms. We can do it two ways. The first one is by doing elimination. So Gaussian elimination with well-chosen subsets of parties, but we don't have a generic method for that. So we have to verify it experimentally, but we have a generic method for something more subtle, where if we perform the computation in a well-chosen finite field, the hard terms are going to evaluate to 0 modulo k+1 when k+1 is a prime power. So to summarize our contribution, we have a new framework for K-party PSM, where the previous upper bounds hold. We have a new technique that yields a better communication complexity for infinitely many K. And for unbalanced two-party PSM, we have new results. For example, we can have Alice send n to the 1/3 bits and Bob send n to the 2/3 bits. There still remains open question. So the first two ones are, can we expand and generalize our result? So our new complexity for all K, and our new unbalanced complexity, our new unbalanced PSM for all eta. And then the moonshot is to find a better communication complexity all in all, because we are still far away from the theoretical best, which is in the big O of log n. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. Questions? So, thank you again. And move to the last presentation of this session. Blockchains enable non-interactive MPC by Vipul Goyal, Elisaweta Masova, Brian Pano, and Ifan Song. And Elisaweta will give the presentation.
If it works.
They'll just do this.
Looks fine.
She wants to see her name.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa, and to start things off, let us briefly recall what MPC is. It stands for Secure Multi-Party Computation and allows mutual distrusting parties to perform computations on their private inputs while ensuring that nothing besides the output of the computation is leaked. Since its introduction in the 80s, there has been a lot of research on MPC, and now we know that 4 rounds are both necessary and sufficient for MPC in the fully malicious case in the plain model. However, ideally, we would like to get something better than 4 rounds, possibly by changing the model. I will now introduce you to ours. First, we assume public bulletin boards, and we require an unforgeable proof of publication. As multiple prior works noted, such bulletin boards exist in real life, with the most notable example being the blockchains. Next, we assume something which we call conditional storage and retrieval systems, CSARs. Intuitively, a CSAR allows a party to store a secret along with a release condition. Then, if some other party shows that it can satisfy this release condition, the secret is privately released to that party. Note that as in the recent years, there have been multiple proposals for similar functionalities, and they typically have been based on blockchains as well. Finally, in our work, there are 2 kinds of participants. We have MPC contributors, these are the parties who supply inputs, and we have evaluators, these are the parties who wish to receive the output. In this model, our goal is to provide an MPC protocol which does not require interaction between the participants and requires only a single round of participation from the MPC contributors. More formally, given an possibly interactive MPC protocol pi, which is secure against fully malicious adversaries, we can transform it into another protocol pi prime, which is also secure against fully malicious adversaries, and now in the blockchain model, which does not require interaction between the participants. The contributors are required to participate for only a single round. The evaluators might need to participate for multiple rounds. The adversary is allowed to corrupt as many MPC contributors in pi prime as it can corrupt MPC participants in the original protocol pi. The adversary is also allowed to corrupt all of the evaluators. How do we do it? Well, the main idea is the following. The contributors start by gobbling the next message function for each round of pi, while hard-coding their private inputs. Then the contributors store the gobbled circuits and wire keys with CSAR. The evaluators can then retrieve the circuits and wire keys from the CSAR and just execute the gobbled circuits. While this high-level overview is pretty simple, the actual construction is a little bit more tricky due to the non-interactive setting. For example, the gobbled circuits are secure only if at most a single wire key is revealed for each wire. However, the issue is that at the time the parties store those wire keys with CSAR, the inputs of other parties are not known. So there is no way to predict which wire key will be needed during the computation. And so effectively, we need to store both the key for 0 and the key for 1 for each wire. The idea that we had here was the following. First, the parties store the wire keys for 0 and 1 in 2 separate CSAR requests. And then the evaluator sort of needs to commit to the course of execution. What I mean by that is the following. The evaluator executes the gobbled circuits of a certain round, and then publishes the outputs of those gobbled circuits on the bulletin board. The CSAR release condition for bit B on wire X for round I+1 requires then that there is a proof of publish of evaluator's commitment MI, such that MI has exactly bit B on position X. This ensures that we are revealing only those wire keys that are actually needed during the execution. There are a lot of further challenges we had to overcome. For example, we had to ensure that the inputs that the evaluators feed into the gobbled circuits are consistent with each other, and that the evaluators cannot sort of reorder the gobbled circuits for the different routes. To summarize, in our main result, we showed that it is possible to provide MPC which does not require interaction between the participants and requires only one round of participation from the MPC contributors. This is in the blockchain model. We additionally have a protocol which provides guaranteed output delivery. And in our final results, we were able to improve the number of CSAR calls that we make in our construction. This is all I have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have questions?
But is the protocol also reusable? So parties send inputs, encodings of the inputs. Can they evaluate multiple functions? The evaluators can they evaluate multiple? They would need to.
Please repeat the question.
Is the protocol reusable? No, the parties would need to do this for any function.
Again, send back.
Yeah.
Good. Other question? Okay. Yeah. So let's thank Lisa again. We have a question for Chenda. Is it still here? Yes. Oh, yeah. So, Ran, would you want to read your question?
Sure, thanks. Sorry about that. So the question is for Chen, but just you mentioned in your talk that your definition as an alternative to using erasures and non-committed encryption. So does it mean that you really your definition obviates the need to erase data, in the sense that the erasure data will not help towards satisfying your definition, or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually it might still help in some contexts. Like the concrete definition that we give in the paper allows to overcome this specific type of commitment problem, right? The one where you, like, that is provoked when you commit to your input and then you get corrupted, right? But this doesn't mean that this is not the only instance, right, of the commitment problem. Commitment problem can arise in many parts of the protocol, and I believe that the use of erasures can still help in satisfying the definition. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Okay. I have to get into it more, more deeply. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the speakers, and we have the coffee break now.